to the Student World Talks. My name is Lean, and today I will be the host for this episode. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today, for being here, for tuning in. I appreciate you guys being here and, following your dreams to accomplish what you want, which is obviously to study abroad. And this is why we are here to help you guys do that. So, today I can promise you that this will be a very beneficial and informative episode because we're going to talk about a unique destination, which, as you saw in the title, is New Zealand. So, before even talking more about this destination and introducing today's guest, I would like to ask you guys to comment your countries. Where are you watching us from? And also tell me in the comments, have you ever been to New Zealand or do you know anyone there? Just tell me anything you know about New Zealand in the comments and tell me about your countries just so we can say hello to each other, just so we can make it more fun and more engaging. Because at the end of the day, the Student World Talks is for you guys to benefit from all the information, to have fun, and it's like not to waste your time researching on Google, and instead you can just join here and get all the information in one place. So I can already see there's a lot of you here watching, which makes me really excited. I can see Jer from Mexico, and keep your comments coming, guys. I am personally here in Canada now. I also wanted to study abroad. I came here to Canada when I was just 17 to also pursue my education here. So I know what you guys are going through, and I would really love to keep helping you. And this is why we do what we do. So hello, Imam from Bangladesh. Hello, Moses from Kenya. Hello, Ayrton from Brazil. Hello, Nathan from Brazil as well. Hello, Gary. And we also have Anderson from Ecuador. Hello, Stephanie from Nigeria. And Asfor is from Colombia. Hello. Currently living in Vancouver. That's cool. Thank you so much, guys, for commenting. Ada from Turkey. And we have Shabab from Australia. So thank you guys for commenting. And just like how you commented your countries and like you're commenting here, I want you to keep doing that throughout the live as well by commenting your questions, anything you need to know about studying in New Zealand, anything that you need to know in terms of student life, cost of living there, studying there. So whatever you want to know, this is your place, this is your time. So keep your questions coming in the comments and we will make sure to answer them. And also before introducing the more about the destination, I want to remind you guys to like this live if you're enjoying, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel just so you can always get notified about the videos that we're posting, and just so that you don't miss anything. So I can still see comments coming. Thank you so much, guys, for sharing that. I really enjoy reading all those countries, and it's really fun to know where are people watching us from. So, as I said before, this is going to be about the destination New Zealand. We're going to have a representative from Education in New Zealand to tell you all about this destination. First, did you know that all of New Zealand's universities are ranked in the top 3% in the world? This is great, I know. And also, the excellent education system combined with the high quality of life are really what make this an ideal destination. It is known for the friendliness of the people, the safety, and of course, what we really know of the beautiful sceneries there. It's such a beautiful place to be in. So also, you will be surrounded with like an excellent support system for international students. But there's so much more to know about this great destination. So let's watch this video together to know more about it.
Are you ready to take a new look at your future? A new look at the world around you? A new look at how learning is evolving? A new look at how culture can unite us? A new look at how tradition can inform the future? A new look at how different views can deepen our understanding. A new look at how innovation can solve problems in fresh ways. A new look at experiencing a world-leading education from anywhere. A new look at studying in a way that suits you. Because when we take a new look, we find new paths forward. So if you're ready for new,
take a new look at New Zealand education.
Great. I am personally really excited for this episode because New Zealand is somewhere that I personally really want to visit one day. So let's finally introduce our lovely guest for today. We have Amy here with us. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Lane.
Hi, how are you?
Good, great, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining and for being here today. I want to first give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and introduce education in New Zealand.
Hey, well, kia ora koutou. That means hello everyone in Māori, the Indigenous language in New Zealand. My name is Amy Rutherford. I am the Regional Director for the Americas, the Middle East and Europe at Education New Zealand. I am based in Washington, DC at the New Zealand Embassy. And Education New Zealand is a government agency dedicated to international education in New Zealand. So we work to promote New Zealand as an education destination. We work on the bilateral education relationship between countries. We also have some scholarships programs designed to send New Zealand students offshore as well. So we do all of the work to do with international education in New Zealand.
Perfect. So as you heard, guys, Amy is the perfect person to answer all your questions about studying at this great destination. So the first question is, why should students choose New Zealand as a study destination?
Well, among English-speaking countries, New Zealand is ranked #1 for preparing students for the future. So in terms of an education which helps you get the job you want, helps you find the career that you want to have in the future, New Zealand is #1 amongst English-speaking countries in that sense. And you also took the words out of my mouth when you said at the beginning that all New Zealand universities are ranked in the top 3% of universities in the world. So it's a very high quality education system. No other country can claim that. No other country has all of their universities within that top 3%. So, and also it's beyond the high quality education system as well. New Zealand was the first country to have a wellbeing strategy for international students, which means that we really care about how international students in New Zealand are both looked after and making sure that while you're studying in New Zealand, you're safe and well.
Great. And which cities offer the best student life there, would you say?
Well, New Zealand is a country of 5 million people, which when, I see here that some people are from Brazil, so we're quite a bit smaller than Brazil or Colombia or many of the other countries that people are attending this live today from. But we are an average sized country. New Zealand has one very large city, so Auckland, which has about 1.8 million people who live in Auckland. But also if you want to go outside of the largest city in New Zealand, you can choose to study in other cities like Wellington, which is capital city, Christchurch, which is the largest city in the South Island of New Zealand, or say Dunedin. So you can either study in a large cosmopolitan city or you can study in a smaller city as well. So there's opportunities depending on what you want to study and where you want to study.
Great. So guys, let us know in the comments, what are you curious to know about New Zealand? Just anything you're curious about, anything you're wondering there. So just let us know in the comments and we will answer that. So for people who've never been to New Zealand before, can you tell them how is the environment there? Would you say it's more of like a very busy destination, or is it more relaxed? It has that like relaxed vibe to it?
Well, I think when people think about New Zealand, the people who are here today, when they think about New Zealand, people think about the beautiful mountains and the beautiful lakes. They think a lot about how beautiful New Zealand is, and it is. But also has, like I said, of the 5 million people who live in New Zealand, 1.8 million of them live in Auckland. So that is a large city. So depending on whether or not you like the quiet environment or the busy metropolitan environment, there are choices for you in New Zealand. I mean, I live in Washington, DC at the moment, which is a large cosmopolitan city. But I lived in Wellington before I moved to Washington, DC to take up this job. And Wellington is a smaller capital city, but it is equally cosmopolitan. And Lonely Planet said it was the coolest little capital in the world. So it depends what you want. You can get that large, busy city environment, or you can go out into a smaller town in New Zealand and study there. It really depends on what you're interested in.
That's great. So it really has it all, and depending on what they like, they can choose. There's a question asking if I know English, can I study and live there?
Well, it depends. You can study. English is one of the official languages of New Zealand. It's the most commonly spoken language in New Zealand. So if you do speak English, yes, you can apply to study, and then you can, if you're accepted, you can come and live and study in New Zealand. You can also learn English in New Zealand as well. So there are English language colleges throughout New Zealand that will teach English if you need to either increase your English language proficiency or you want to start very much from scratch. You can do that in New Zealand.
Great, thank you. And how is the student life in New Zealand in terms of like the number of international students and the multiculturalism there?
So New Zealand is one of the most diverse countries in the world. So about 1 in 4 of all New Zealanders were born outside of New Zealand. So it makes it a very diverse country, which is something I think that people find surprising. Auckland is the largest Polynesian city in the world. So it is a very diverse country, New Zealand. And in terms of international student numbers in New Zealand, pre-COVID, there were about 120,000 international students in New Zealand prior to COVID. But obviously, COVID has had quite a significant effect on international students' numbers in New Zealand since the New Zealand borders have been closed for most of the last 2 years.
Perfect, thank you. And what are the activities that students can participate in, for example, in their weekend or where they just want to have fun with their friends? What are some of those activities?
Everything that you can think of in, say, Auckland, in a large international city, you'll be able to do. So whether or not that's going to the theatre, going to clubs. Also, most people in New Zealand live within about 1.5 hours of the beach. So if you like to surf, you can also ski in New Zealand. You can also take advantage of all of the beautiful outdoor natural environments. New Zealand is easy to get around, I think I would say. Like, it's not an enormous country. So when you study in New Zealand, you have the opportunity on your weekends, like you said, to get out and about and see New Zealand and experience it, to see the people, to experience the outdoor environments, to go running along the beach and see the penguins and the sea lions as well.
That sounds amazing. And there's a question from Hannah. How much does it cost to live there?
So it depends where you go in New Zealand. And if you go onto the Study with the New Zealand website, and we'll put that in the chat there now so you can have a look at that website, it gives you information about cost of living in New Zealand and cost of living probably by city as well. When you apply for a student visa, you have to show evidence of funds of 20,000 New Zealand dollars for a year. That gives you an idea about the kind of money that you would need to have in order to apply for a student visa for a year. But on the Study with New Zealand website, on the Know My NZ part of this Study with New Zealand website, there's information about cost of living, how much it actually costs to live in New Zealand.
Perfect, thank you. And another question is from us for asking, is it possible to go to New Zealand as a worker, or is it mandatory to go as a student first?
It depends what you want to do. So there is the opportunity to apply for a work visa in New Zealand if you have a skill or a career that's on the skill shortages list. At the moment, while the borders still do remain closed for many people, they opened to tourists from Australia yesterday. They opened to tourists from Australia, and there's a staggered reopening of the New Zealand border at the moment. So it's a little bit difficult to say that you could apply for a visa and come to New Zealand in the next couple of months. But yeah, if you go onto the Immigration New Zealand website and have a look at the skills shortages list, you can see what careers, what jobs, what careers we need for people to do in New Zealand. You can look at it that way. Also, if you study in New Zealand, depending on what you study and what level you study at and how long you study for, you can apply for a post-study work rights visa after you've completed your bachelor or higher level qualification in New Zealand. So there are opportunities, yes, for students to stay on in New Zealand if they studied at a certain level. This information is available on the Study with New Zealand website and also on the Immigration New Zealand website as well.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, there was a question asking, like, after studying, what next, if I can get a permanent. So I think that was what you were talking about, the post-study work visa.
Yeah, the post-study work rights, yes. So I encourage students to have a look on those websites that I mentioned, so then you can see whether or not the level of qualification you're looking at studying in New Zealand would be available, whether or not if you would be able to, what level you need to study at New Zealand in order to apply for those post-study work rights at the end of that qualification.
Awesome, thank you. And now going back to talking more about the environment and just New Zealand as a whole, how is the weather like there?
The weather. And New Zealanders like to talk about the weather. That is a great question to ask a New Zealander because we spend a lot of time talking about the weather. Because New Zealand, these small, skinny islands in the middle of the South Pacific, there is no large continent, there's no large landmass between us and Antarctica. So you can get some very exciting weather in New Zealand. There's a really well-known New Zealand song that talks about 4 seasons in one day. You might have to use your umbrella at the same time of having your sunglasses on because it's sunny and rainy at the same time. In terms of temperature, in Celsius, it doesn't get as cold or as hot, say, as where I am in North America, as where I am in Washington, D.C. So in the summer, you're looking around 24 to 28 degrees in the summer during the day, so very pleasant temperatures. In the winter, overnight, it might start to get a bit freezing. You might have some snow a couple of times during the winter, but usually it's a very temperate environment, very temperate weather. So you don't get the huge extremes that you would see in other places. So you said you're in Canada at the moment. You do not have a winter like the Canadian winter. But if you want to make friends with any New Zealander, ask them about the weather because they will tell you.
That's interesting. Yeah. Um, so Stephanie is asking about the accommodation options in New Zealand.
Yeah, so accommodation, most people who study in New Zealand as, say, a bachelor's level student or a graduate level student would live in what we call a flat. So that's like a small apartment, a small house where you live with usually you live with other students and you pool your money together, so you cook your dinner together with your flatmates, for example. So that's where many students who study at bachelor's or above level would be living. Also, homestay options are available in New Zealand where you can go and live with a New Zealand family. That's particularly good for students who are studying English language. So they get to live with a family and also have that day-to-day kind of like family, kind of learn the English from the family as well. Accommodation options, you can have a look through the Study with New Zealand website as well, the Know My NZ website, which talks in detail about the kind of accommodation options that you'll have across the country. At school level, at some schools there's also the opportunity to live in student dorms as well, but that depends on the school that you'll be studying at.
Awesome. And now we know that they like talking about the weather in New Zealand, but what do they like to eat there? What's the traditional food there in New Zealand?
Well, I think from traditionally, the Indigenous people of New Zealand would have what they call a hangi, which is when you cook, you heat up rocks in a hangi pit in the ground, and then you put in your food on top of that. It's kind of steamed and roasted in the ground. So that's their traditional. I would encourage everyone while they're in New Zealand to go to a marae, to go to a Māori sort of town hall and have some hangi. It's delicious. But also New Zealand, where we're located in the South Pacific, And like I said, New Zealand is one of the most and foremost diverse countries in the world. There is a lot of Asian food, a lot of Polynesian influenced food, also a lot of European influenced food as well. We call it, in New Zealand, we call it Pacific fusion. So we take influences from Asia, from Europe, and across the Pacific to make our own delicious food. Because we're surrounded by the oceans as well, it means there's a lot of delicious seafood in New Zealand, delicious fresh seafood. New Zealand also exports a lot of meat, so lamb, beef, around the world. So there's lots of delicious meat options, and that's one of the things I miss while I live in Washington DC, is access to the fresh and delicious food in New Zealand.
Yeah, this sounds interesting and delicious.
Yeah.
So now that we talked a little bit about the overview of the destination, let's talk the next topic about the education in New Zealand. Can you describe the quality of education there?
Yeah, so I mentioned at the beginning how New Zealand is number one in the English-speaking world for educating students for the future. We also talked about how all New Zealand universities are ranked in the top 3% of universities in the world. And also, there's just been quite a large reform of the New Zealand vocational education system, where New Zealand Institutes of Technology and Polytechnics have been amalgamated into one institution, which is called Te Pūkenga. Te Pūkenga is now, I think it is the 28th largest education institution in the world. So, and that the focus of Te Pūkenga is to educate vocational students. And in New Zealand, we have an integrated education system where you can study pretty much up to PhD level in some vocational areas at Te Pūkenga, at the Institute of Skills and Technology. So the New Zealand education system is enormously high quality, from early childhood education all the way up to PhD level. And again, I would encourage you to go onto the Study with New Zealand website to have a look at those metrics, those numbers that talk about the high quality education that is available when you study with New Zealand.
Awesome. And what are the world-class universities there?
The world-class universities. So there are 8 universities in New Zealand, and I can tell you what the names are. So the University of Auckland, Auckland University of Technology, University of Waikato, NASA University, Victoria University of Wellington, the University of Canterbury, Lincoln University, and the University of Otago. And I just ran through them, going from the north of New Zealand to the south of New Zealand. So Auckland is the largest university in New Zealand. I think they have around 40 to 45,000 students. And as the largest university in New Zealand, they're also the highest ranked in New Zealand. The last university that I mentioned is the University of Otago. They are located on the South Island of New Zealand, the southern part of the South Island of New Zealand, and they're New Zealand's oldest university. So I think they're about 160 years old, something like that. So we've got that, and we have everything in between. From Lincoln University, it has about 3,000 to 4,000 students, so a smaller university. So you can have all of the different options in terms of university study in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And there's a question from Sharu, going back to more talking about the New Zealand cities, asking what is the best place to stay while studying? Wellington, Christchurch, or Dunedin? Dunedin?
Dunedin.
Dunedin.
Well, I was born in Dunedin, so I'm going to have to say Dunedin because that's where I was born. So no. So it really depends what you want to do, what you're interested in New Zealand. If you want to study in the capital city, you want to go to a capital city, and then Wellington is the place that you want to go. If you want to study in the student city in New Zealand, in Dunedin, it's a small city. It's about 120,000 people, but about 25 to 30,000 of those people live in Dunedin as students. So it's one of the largest sort of concentration of students in the world. So almost everyone who lives in one of the suburbs of Dunedin is a student. So you're surrounded by students in an education-focused city. So it depends what you want to do. And Christchurch is an enormous amount of kind of innovation that's going on in Christchurch at the moment. There were some earthquakes in Christchurch, I think it was 11 years ago. And so they're doing a huge amount of rebuilding work in Christchurch. So if you're studying engineering, you're studying like anything to do with like construction, building management, engineering, I mean, Christchurch would probably be the place that you'd want to go. So it really depends on what you're studying.
Yeah. Um, so, does New Zealand have any online programs?
Yes, so there are online programs available too, and which have been very popular, obviously during the COVID times, while students have not been able to travel to New Zealand to take up study opportunities. And if you look on the Study with New Zealand website, you can see the kinds of online opportunities that are available for students to start their study as well. There are also global pathways available for students. So there are New Zealand universities have partnerships and agreements with which recognise, which allow you to start your study in some offshore locations and then halfway through to the New Zealand institution after, say, a year or 2 years. So NCUK, the University Consortium, has these global pathways available for students, say, for example, in Peru. I was in Dubai at the Dubai Expo in January, where the NCUK opened up their latest pathway program for students in Dubai to start their studies in Dubai and then pathway through to New Zealand on these global pathway programs. So yes, you can start your study either online, or you may be able to start your study in person, but at a recognised pathway provider.
Yeah, that sounds really like a great option. Thank you. So, Jude is asking, are New Zealanders welcoming to foreigners?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, New Zealand is a very, very diverse country. 1 in 4 New Zealanders were born outside of New Zealand, and in Auckland, I think it's more like 1 in 3 Aucklanders were born outside of New Zealand. So it is a welcoming place for people from all over the world to visit, to study, and also if you meet immigration requirements to, come and work in New Zealand as well. So yes, I would say New Zealand is a welcoming place for foreigners to visit.
Awesome. Yeah. And now going back to talking more about the education, what are some of the most popular majors that students choose at universities?
Oh, most popular majors. Anything that you can think of, really, I think. New Zealand universities, because they're so highly ranked, they have lots of very highly ranked programs as well. So you can study anything from business, from engineering, like I said. I think someone in the chat asked about biomedical studies as well. Yes, you may be able to study dentistry in New Zealand. I did my master's in psychology as well. So the options are very, very broad to study, very much whatever you're interested in, you can study that in New Zealand.
That's great to know. And someone is also asking about cybersecurity. Is that also?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, so you can study security studies, cybersecurity. I think it's at Massey University. Also, the University of Waikato, I think, has some cybersecurity programs as well. Yeah. And again, if you go onto the Study with New Zealand website and enter in the course that you're interested in studying, you'll be able to see where you can study that course in New Zealand.
Thank you. And what about these student services that are offered at universities? What are they usually? What are usually the international student services offered?
Yeah, so like I said, New Zealand was the first country in the world to have a wellbeing strategy for international students, and we're also the first country in the world to introduce pastoral care requirements to support international students while they're in New Zealand. So when you go on to that code of pastoral care for the support of international students in New Zealand covers kind of everything from the information, making sure that the information that you receive when you go onto the university or to Pukenga or the school's website is correct. It also covers making sure that international students have access to 24-hour student support services. It also covers things like ensuring that international students, in order for them to enrol and programs in New Zealand, they have to have medical insurance. So it covers all of those things to make sure that when students are in New Zealand, they have access to that pastoral care and support whenever they need it.
Yeah, great. That sounds like a very supportive community. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. And there's a question asking about if nursing is a valuable career in New Zealand.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely nursing is a very valuable career in New Zealand. And the Pukenga, the Institute of Skills and Technology, and some New Zealand universities offer undergraduate and postgraduate nursing qualifications too. It's a very valuable career. I think in many countries there is a shortage of nurses, including in New Zealand.
Yeah. And what other jobs are also high in demand in New Zealand?
Um, I think across the board, we're looking at high value technology workers, people who work across the technology spectrum, also interested in people who have very high level agricultural qualifications because some of New Zealand's largest export industries include the agricultural focus. IT, if you're looking at IT as well, if you're studying IT, that's an in demand qualification. Also looking at creative sectors as well. So it's not just the the kind of business focused, IT focused, also creative sectors. You may have heard of the Weta Workshop, Digital, which is one of the largest visual effects companies in the world. So Peter Jackson set up Weta Digital, Weta Workshop, and they are always looking for highly qualified visual effects artists. So you looking at things like, yeah, those creative industries are very much in demand too. Again, if you go onto the Immigration New Zealand website, you can look at the skills shortages list to see what particular skills and careers are in demand in New Zealand.
Great, thank you. And a lot of the students are also wondering if they can work part-time while studying at a university in New Zealand.
It does depend. Students who are studying, say, at bachelor's level or above, can usually work 20 hours a week while they're studying. Also, they can usually work full time over summer holidays as well. At other levels, it is slightly more complicated than me being able to say yes or no. So you go onto the Study in New Zealand website, Study with New Zealand, sorry, and then also the Immigration New Zealand website will have more information about what programs have work rights while you're studying. But if you're studying at bachelor's level or above full time, you can usually say yes, you can work for up to 20 hours a week or full time over the summer. And some English language programs, depending on the length of time you're staying in New Zealand, may be able to work for 20 hours a week as well. But again, I would encourage students to have a look on the Immigration and Study with New Zealand websites they can specifically see whether or not their course would allow them to work while in New Zealand.
Mhm. Yeah, and as a follow-up question, Hannah is also asking, are there a lot of job opportunities for students who are studying at university in New Zealand?
Yeah, there are. I mean, um, yes, there are. I mean, a lot of the things that I would normally have said pre-COVID, it's a bit different at the moment because mostly the New Zealand borders remain closed, so it's a slightly different situation. But yes, there are all kinds of opportunities for students to work either on campus or off campus.
Great. And now that we're talking more about employment opportunities, we know that you mentioned a little bit about the post-study work visa, but can you tell the students just more details about what is it, and when they can get it?
I would encourage students who are interested in the post-study work rights to go onto the Immigration New Zealand website to look at um, and look at the requirements in relation to what they want to study in New Zealand. So if you're studying, say, a bachelor's level program for or above full time, you know, completing your bachelor's degree for at least, I think it's at least 2 years in New Zealand, or above that, you can apply for the post-study work rights visa. That doesn't mean that that you're guaranteed a job in New Zealand. That just allows you those post-study work rights to give you the time, to look for a job. Doesn't guarantee that you're going to find that job in the area that you want to work in, but it does give you the option to work in New Zealand.
Awesome, thank you. And we talked a bit about the high quality of education in New Zealand, but what about the learning style? So, what is the learning style there, and how does it get the students ready for the marketplace?
Yeah, so I think New Zealand, the New Zealand education system wants to teach students how to think. So it's a collaborative working environment in classrooms in New Zealand. And when you're whether or not you're in a large lecture or you're in a small tutorial or you're in your classroom at high school in New Zealand, you have quite a close relationship with your lecturer, with your teacher as well. So it gives you the opportunity to ask questions. It gives you the opportunity to have that discourse with the person who is teaching you. It's not an education system which just kind of makes you sit there and listen and then do your exam where you just regurgitate exactly what it is that you've been told. In New Zealand, you're encouraged to question. You're encouraged to come up with your own ideas. You're encouraged to take responsibility for your own learning as well. So a lot of for students studying at university level, for example, and above, you're responsible to make sure that you show up to your lectures. You're responsible to make sure that you do your assignments. It's your responsibility to also make sure you ask the questions of your lecturers and the people who are teaching you as well.
Awesome, yeah, and we do also have another video to show you guys more about New Zealand.
Our world is changing, and our world needs new, because new doesn't just think about the world's problems, it cares. New acts boldly to solve challenges, but never forgets the importance of people.
It just opens my eyes to a much wider opportunities.
New is prepared for today and ready to create tomorrow.
I learned about identity, about myself.
New welcomes open minds and different perspectives.
The thing that surprised me the most is the diversity of culture here.
New is progressive and never stops learning.
Qualifications in New Zealand are recognized worldwide.
New is the problem solvers, the go-getters, the innovators, the big thinkers. New is a New Zealand education, and new is what the world needs.
Great, that was very encouraging. I like that. So let me know what you guys thought of that, and keep your questions coming about New Zealand, about anything you're curious to know about. We do have a question here from Sharu asking, after opening the borders, will New Zealand accept the same international student rate as before?
Yeah, that's an interesting question in terms of what we expect. So pre-COVID, there were about 120,000 international students in New Zealand each year. And obviously the numbers of international students in New Zealand since the borders have been closed for the last 2 years is significantly smaller. From October this year, students will be able to apply as normal as in the past for a visa to come study in New Zealand once they have an offer of place from a New Zealand education institution, whether or not that's a school or a university or an English language college. So, and then they will be able to start their studies from the beginning of the next academic year. The academic year in New Zealand runs from February to November. So we should see large numbers of students coming back to New Zealand in time for the start of semester 1 in February next year. In terms of numbers of students returning to New Zealand, I'm not sure in terms of, depends how many students want to come to New Zealand to study in 2023, but there are not caps. So if the question was around, are we going to reduce the number of student visas available, And there are not caps on the student visas that are available. Students will be able to apply like they did in the past.
Great. Yeah. And in terms of application process for university, what are the English language proficiency tests that are accepted for New Zealand universities?
It depends on the university. So you'd need to go onto the Study with New Zealand website, look at the university, and get to the specific university website from there. But I think it is around. I think the standard kind of the tests that are accepted are the IELTS, the TOEFL. Also, if you complete like an English language course of a certain level in New Zealand, you can do like a English for academic purposes program in New Zealand, and then meet the English language requirements that way. So yeah, but yes, IELTS, TOEFL. I think I'm trying to think. When I was doing my masters in New Zealand, I worked for a New Zealand university myself, and I think the English language requirements are usually around an IELTS of 6.0 for undergraduate study, 6.5 or above for postgraduate study. Some programs may have English requirements that are higher than that. Say, if you want to study to be a dentist, for example, I think the English language requirements are higher than the standard 6 or 6.5. So you'll need to have a look on the university's website to see the specific requirements.
Great, thank you. And there's a question asking if it's possible to work while studying in New Zealand as an international student. I think, Amy, you already mentioned that it depends, but would you like to repeat the answer for Jacinta?
Yeah. So depending on what you're studying, if you're studying bachelor's level or above full-time and going to complete, say, your bachelor's in New Zealand, you can normally study for up to 20 hours a week and then full-time over the New Zealand summer. And also if you're studying some English language courses, I think 14 weeks or more, you can apply to study up to 20 years a week, 20 hours a week as well. But again, if you go onto the Immigration New Zealand website, you'll be able to see those specific requirements and how they relate to what you want to study.
Great. And if an international student wants to start applying now to university, how would the admission process look like? Like, how would they apply? Where would they apply?
Okay, so either you can apply directly to the university itself, and if you go onto the university's website, they will be very clear about how to walk you through the application process, but you can also apply through a recognised agent. So if you go onto the Study with New Zealand website, you can find the university that you're looking for. You can look at the website of the university to find the agents that they work with. You can also Google education agents in your country to see which education agents in your country will help you through the application process. And they'll help you with to make sure that you have all of the correct documents. They'll help you with the translation of those documents. Also help you with understanding the English language requirements if English isn't your first language as well. So, I mean, if I was to encourage you one way or the other, I would encourage you to apply through an agent. They really help you through all of the application process.
Awesome. And when can they apply? When are usually the deadlines for New Zealand universities?
They can apply at any time, but deadlines are usually the end of October if you want to start in semester one, which starts the end of February, beginning of March. So that is a normal time to apply by sort of around the mid to end October to start in the next February/March.
Great. And so, is there a tuition fee average for the universities in New Zealand? I know that it might vary depending on the university.
Yeah, it varies a lot depending both on the university, what level you're studying at, and what type of program you're studying at as well. I would say, I would say encourage students to go on to the university's website to look at the specific program. But yeah, I don't want to give a specific amount of money because it's such a very kind of cost, but somewhere between, I would say maybe I don't know if I want to say an average, maybe $20 to $25 $1,000 New Zealand dollars a year. Have a look on the website though, and we've put the links to the Study with New Zealand and Immigration New Zealand websites in the chat, so have a look in there too.
Yeah, exactly. The website is in the chat. You guys can check that out, and also check the university websites to know the exact cost for your program. So, a lot of students are also asking about scholarships. So, what are the scholarship opportunities that international students can apply to?
There are scholarship opportunities available mainly through the university that a student would apply to. You can also go onto the Study with New Zealand website too to have a look at scholarships that are available on that website. But universities do have scholarships available for international students. If you're studying at PhD level, there are large numbers of scholarships available for PhD students because international PhD students in New Zealand pay domestic student fees. So they pay the same fees as a New Zealand student, which means they have access to large numbers of scholarships for that PhD level.
And Samuel is asking if we apply through the university directly, how can we apply to the student visa?
So what happens is you apply to the university, and if your application is accepted and you get an offer of place, so you've met all of the entrance requirements for the program and university that you want to enter, they will give you an offer of place, and they will also provide information that you need to apply for your student visa. And then you need to apply for your student visa after you have that offer of place from the university. And your agent, if you work with an education agent, your agent will be able to help you through that application process to both the university and to Immigration New Zealand in order for you to get that visa in order to be able to travel to New Zealand to start your studies.
Great. And I think you already mentioned a little bit about the current COVID situation, but a lot of the students are also still wondering when they can finally go to New Zealand and study there.
Yeah. So students who want to study on short programs for up to 6 months, who come from countries where there is a working holiday scheme between New Zealand and that country, and you can go onto the Immigration New Zealand website and see where those working holiday scheme visas are available, can enter New Zealand from I think mid-March on that working holiday scheme visa to study for up to 6 months. So there's shorter programs of up to 6 months. From October, students can apply to do, they can apply for any program, and then they can apply for their student visa to take up any of those programs from October. So that is, I think, the sort of main date that you're looking at would be in October to start your studies at the beginning of 2023, which is the start of the New Zealand academic year.
Great, yeah, thank you. So guys, keep your questions coming. We do still have a couple of minutes left for you to ask your questions, anything that you want to know about studying in New Zealand. And if you can't think of a question now, or if your question wasn't answered for some reason, you can still contact Amy after this live, and we're going to provide the contact information on screen shortly. But one last question from my side is, what advice do you have for international students so that they can adapt faster to the culture in New Zealand?
Yeah, so Education New Zealand has a website that helps students with that process of both before they go to New Zealand, learning about New Zealand, and also while they're in New Zealand, it gives more information about, it helps you kind of explore New Zealand, tells you about the life and culture in New Zealand, tells you how to personal well-being in New Zealand. It talks about housing and working and money and banking, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to put in the chat now the Know My NZ website, which is the place that students can go for information on life in New Zealand. Know My is a phrase in Māori that sort of means like welcome and invitation, basically. So that Know My NZ website really helps students with that advice about how to integrate into New Zealand while they're studying. I mean, New Zealanders are generally welcoming people. New Zealanders are also interested in people from overseas. So, I mean, I would encourage, and like I said, New Zealanders like to talk about the weather. So, as long as you're equipped to talk about the weather a lot, I think you're going to help. That's going to really help you in New Zealand. New Zealanders also really like when people from overseas compliment New Zealand. So, if you want to make a friend of New Zealander, talk about the weather, say how much you like New Zealand, and how beautiful it is, and that really helps with getting started.
Yeah, those are great tips. Thank you for sharing that, Amy. And guys, I think that was it for today. If you don't have more questions coming in the comments, Amy, thank you so much for answering all those questions and for all the knowledge and information that you gave the students. So, guys, as I mentioned before, if you did not have the chance to ask your questions today, you can still get in touch through this contact information that we will provide now on screen. So please save this contact information and don't hesitate to get in touch. Amy, would you like to add anything else, just like anything else for the students?
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you, Lane, for your excellent questions, and thanks to everyone who wrote their questions in the chat too. It's been a really great conversation, and I look forward to welcoming students to New Zealand next year in 2023. It's going to be really great to have international students return to New Zealand again. Really looking forward to it. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy, once again for being here and for answering the questions. It was so fun and so informative at the same time. And we really hope to see you soon again on the Student World Talks. And thank you.
Thank you.
So, guys, that was it for today's episode. As I said, this was very unique one because we talked all about the destination, about anything you need to know from the student life to the cost of living. So I hope you guys really enjoyed it as much as I did. And also, I want to remind you guys that we do have these lives every Tuesday. So I would be really happy for you guys to join us next week as well, and in our next lives. And to know more about the lives, about all the information that we post about, which is all related to studying abroad, you can follow us on Instagram, which is provided here on screen, the Student World. We do have updates all the time. We have posts about studying abroad, about universities. You can check out our posts and comment and send us a message telling us what you like and what you don't. And we will be more than happy to talk to you guys and know more about you and your plans. So thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to be here and ask your questions on the Student World Talks. And I hope to see you soon again next Tuesday. Thank you guys and goodbye.